So in this video, I'm going to go over the basic approach, or at least what I recommend for the basic approach to questions about the function of an underlined sentence. And so these examples come from Resolve Test Prep, the free sample test available on their website. In subsequent videos, I'll get into some more complicated, challenging examples, but here again, just the basic approach. And the most important thing about the approach to these questions, I would say, is to take stock of each sentence as you go. What each sentence seems to be contributing to the passage. So let's just use this as an example. So it says, most climate scientists agree that unchecked global warming may result in catastrophic outcomes affecting the planet's ecosystem. Okay, so that's a sort of a broad claim, but we can also say it's sort of background. It's background information, something like that. Okay, however, there is far less consensus on the timing of this projected catastrophe, as different climate models predict different paces of warming. And so notice here how I originally just called this background, but I think we can do better now and say this is something climate scientists agree on. This is something they disagree on. And I'm not saying that you need to write this down for every sentence as you're taking the test. It's not really practical to do that, but this is the kind of thing we want to at least be thinking. Okay, and now we don't want to just go over the answer choices just yet because we have to see how this relates to what follows. So these researchers have explored the implications of this uncertainty on policymaking, concluding that decision makers should not insist on perfect forecasts, but instead focus on the moral necessity of ensuring the ecosystem's long-term sustainability. How could we characterize this last sentence? Well, I'm just going to circle this and say it's talking about the implications of this uncertainty and how that should be dealt with. Okay, but here I think we have a pretty good sense of what the answer should say before we get over there. It's something that climate scientists disagree on. Okay, is it a concern that they have examined? Maybe? That seems a little broad, but I wouldn't want to eliminate it just yet. B, it offers support for a claim made earlier in the text. No. And really the transition word there is all we need to eliminate B, because if it were offering support, it would say something like, for example, or to illustrate this. However, indicates a contrast, so it's not going to introduce something that offers support. It presents the results of the study. Definitely not. And then D, it describes a problem or possible problem with the methodology. Methodology, fancy word, but it just means the method, the steps taken, the process, and so no. And so here's one where I would not have initially highlighted that as, obviously being correct, but it is a concern. It is a concern. And what is the concern? The fact that different models predict different paces of warming. The fact that there is some disagreement. So they've explored the implications of this uncertainty or this concern. They've examined it, and then they have come to a conclusion. And so I think this shows that we don't have to come up with something perfect in order to get the right answer. We just want to be proactive and be thinking about how the parts fit together. But let's look at a second example, also from Resolve Test Prep. So the chemical DDT experienced widespread use. Well, I guess a chemical can experience, but underwent widespread use beginning in the 1940s as a highly effective pesticide that killed disease-carrying mosquitoes and other insects. However, following the discovery of DDT's harmful effects on the health of humans, birds, and other animals, the United States banned its use in 1972. So here we've got, I'm just going to say background for both of these. A lot of times that's how I sort of characterize things to myself in the beginning. I mean, it's not always going to be accurate to call it background, but here I think it is. It's historical background. Underlined sentence says, but exposing pregnant women to high levels of DDT harms more than just mothers. It can damage the DNA of their embryos as well. Okay, and so now, kind of like with the previous one, we get to the underlined sentence. It gives us a little bit more context for the preceding part. So this is saying, it's giving us some background on some harmful effects. So background regarding or on harmful effects. Here we have additional harmful effects, beyond those that were known back then prior to when it was banned, the harmful effects that led to the ban. And so now we have this 2021 study that determined such and such that the granddaughters of pregnant women exposed to DDT experienced an increased risk of health problems. Okay, so additional harmful effects that were illustrated or confirmed by subsequent studies. And apologies for the horrible handwriting. Subsequent studies. Okay. Again, though, I think it's important to read the whole passage because a lot of times on these questions, you need to understand what comes before it, but also what comes after it in order to get the right answer. So it contradicts the previous statement. No. Maybe there's a little bit of a trap here, a potential trap in the sense that we've got a contrast word, but that doesn't mean that it's contradicting it. And here, it's not even really a contrast the way it's used. It's saying it not only does this, it also does this other stuff. But anyway, it's not contradicting it. It introduces a concern that is illustrated by the discussion of multi-generational effects of DDT. Kind of a coincidence that I put illustrated, but I think that looks pretty good. But let's just confirm. It presents an alternative explanation. No. It's a general statement that their findings confirm or illustrate or corroborate. So it's not an alternative explanation. And it doesn't provide context that clarifies how DNA can damage it. Again, it just sort of makes a kind of broad statement that is illustrated by what follows. And so that's that. And so I would say that both of these are a little more typical of what you might see on Module 1 in the sense that when you get into Module 2, sometimes what happens is you can come up with a pretty decent characterization of what the sentence is doing, but then you get to the answer choices and they're a lot more complicated. So you have to really put the microscope on those answer choices, so to speak. And so what I will do in subsequent videos is look at some of those more complicated examples where, yes, we want to do this as a first step, but we have to be a little bit more precise in eliminating things. But on the other hand, you will get some questions like this, again, more likely on Module 1, where simply being proactive, thinking about how the parts fit together, you will have a pretty good idea of what the answer choice should need to say, or at least you'll be able to quickly eliminate the ones that do not reflect the function of that sentence.